Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Together What If. We're missing Jenny today. She's at a conference, but we're going to talk about power today. And next week, we're going to do part 1 and part 2 as we're continuing on in our series of N.T. Wright's Broken Signposts. We've talked about truth. We've talked about freedom. We've talked about justice. Today, we're talking about power. And power connects a lot to those. So, Jamie, my first question to you is, when you hear the word power, do you have like a general definition in your mind of what power is? Like, what do you think of when you think power?
I think for me, I think the purpose of power is for the ability to control. Whether that be to control my mind personally, control my habits, I mean, it can be individual, so it can be a positive thing, or it trickles out to organizations corporately. It trickles out to political power, international power. So.
I wrote down its capacity, its ability, the ability to direct or influence the behavior of others to the good or to the not so good. We're going to talk about that. The ability to produce an effect, agency. I like having agency. I don't like when I don't feel like I have some autonomy. No one likes to feel powerless. As a matter of fact, some of our most difficult times in our life are when we don't feel like we have control. We don't feel like we have any power, whether it's a health diagnosis or a circumstance, when you feel powerless. And so today I want us to kind of talk about that, but I also want us to talk about why is it a broken signpost? That sounds so good. To have agency, to have independence and autonomy. Well, who wouldn't like that?
Sure.
So why is it a broken signpost?
It's interesting when you were saying that. I hadn't thought about it. Actually, we didn't even rehearse this. But, John Maxwell talks about leadership as influence. But it's almost what you're implying, too, in your definition of power is that power is influence, right? I mean, and that's the role of power is whether it's to influence the agency of myself or whether other people or organizations. So I think that the brokenness of power is that when we use power to influence other people, maybe for our own gain or for our own manipulation, and we see that manifested in so many different ways in today's world.
So you would say it gets broken when we abuse it. I think it also gets broken when we don't exercise it. I'm a victim. I have no power. All recovery and good therapy is going to teach you that you do. No matter what situation you're in, there's a way to exert your own personal power if you have the power to do it. I was reading in N.T. Wright's book, and he's talking about these different philosophies during Jesus's day about power. Like the Essenes were like, "Oh, God's going to handle it all. I can be passive." And then the Sadducees are like, "No, we've got to get in there and do it all." And the Pharisees were like, "No, it's a little of both." And all of these people were vying for control of the narrative when Jesus enters on the scene. So. But you can see those ebbs and flow of people dealing with power in today's world too.
Sure, and different groups of people deal with it differently and how they handle it differently. I want to go back to what you said, that this idea that it's almost it can be manipulative. We can manipulate power by claiming we don't have power, can't we? I mean, I really liked what you said earlier, and that was really thoughtful. Is that this idea that if we play that hand and play that card, that some people do that for the purpose of gaining power over others,
right?
Even by demonstrating, that victim mentality.
Yeah, a power grab from sort of like the back door.
Yeah.
So in today's world, power's almost become a dirty word. And it's popular to say well, those people have the power. So it is almost like synonymous with abuse. And so I think that's another way that it's kind of broken.
Yeah.
Because even the positive definitions of the word have gotten distorted.
Correct.
And why do you think that is?
Well,
necessarily?
we're doing a sermon series here at the church called Fierce. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I wanted to set up at the beginning of that series is saying fierce is not aggressiveness. It's almost a self-confidence. It's a self-restraint kind of, and I think I think the same thing applies to abuse of power. I think people have equated power with an aggressiveness, an aggressive approach to life, and that's and we're seeing that lived out in so many different ways, which is anti-gospel.
It is anti-gospel, and we almost assume that power will be exploitative at some point, where someone will get oppressed. Mm-hmm. I just saw the Barbie movie, and I think there's a theme. No spoilers, I promise, but as if you could spoil the Barbie movie. But I mean, it's deeper than you think, and there is this kernel, this theme of power and autonomy in the movie that I think is pretty culturally relevant right now. And but I want to go ahead and start picking up on what you were laying down there, that it's anti-gospel. So we have been kind of diving into the Gospel of John in this, and when you say it's anti-gospel, can you elaborate a little bit on what you meant in that moment? And then I might talk a little bit about what I gleaned from N.T. Wright.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jesus demonstrated for us a different way of the use of power. And so what we discover in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is we discover power is redefined not in terms of violence, but in terms of self-giving love. And we see that through his life, his teaching, and we can get into more of that. But I think that's when I say it's any violence, any power that leads to violence, whether that be individually or corporately or politically, any power that leads to violence is going to be contrary to a gospel message where Jesus talks about, forgiveness and turning the other cheek and loving your enemy, and it demonstrated ultimately in the cross and in a self-giving love type of approach.
And so I want to think about that for just a second, and like interpersonal conflict.
Okay.
Not just big systems. I want to get to that too, but I was just thinking about this because I had a little kerfuffle the other night with my husband Mark, and so I was grabbing power by not being kind, but by being aggressive. So it was anti-gospel, the way I was behaving, and I have since repented. But on the other hand, at some point, inside me was this voice that says, this is not the way, and so I said, I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to be aggressive. I don't want to, not that I want to like surrender everything, but there's a way to do it. You're saying that is, it is self-giving and it's loving. And of course, as soon as the temperature goes down when you say something like that, but it's vulnerable.
Yes, and that's, to me, is the most fascinating concept of the Christian. One of the many things that just continues to attract me and pull me into deeper thinking in the Christian faith is this concept of a all-powerful, all-knowing, omnipotent God that is willing to surrender power to the point of death. And we can go into the theological reasoning behind all that, but to me, and that becomes the central act of our faith. It's just such a powerful image. I know as Protestants, we don't wear crucifixes and stuff, but maybe maybe we should, to remind ourselves of that ultimate act of self-giving love. I don't. It's a fascinating thing when we think about the power that God was willing to give up that power in order to disempower evil.
Yeah, and so it's the tipping scale. It takes all the heat out of the evil power, because evil. I'm just reminded. I think the Narnia movie does a great job with this image of like when Aslan walks up to the sacrificial platform, and evil's going crazy. It's won the day. It's over, right? There's gloating. It's just disgusting. And then he surrenders everything and is murdered, and the girls everybody's sad, and evil is gloating, and then the whole power shift happens where he's resurrected, and of course saves Narnia, and all of it really in that situation is to save Edmund. But of course we know that it's this cosmic thing happening. And I wish Christians got that a little bit better, instead of just my personal salvation story.
Sure.
Is that we are hope is springing up from this old ground, like we're going to sing in a little bit. It's like he's doing a new thing, a beautiful thing being made out of the dust.
But isn't it fascinating where what the story, the gospel reminds us is that violence will never be overtaken by more violence. More violence will will always just add more violence. But what the gospel teaches us is that and the sacrifice of Christ teaches us is that to put an end to that, to draw a line in the sand, is that there's got to be a self-giving sacrifice, a self-giving act, and that's what we get in Jesus. And it's almost though Jesus all of a sudden puts a hard stop. Now, what we could talk about is well, we still have violence in our world,
of course, right? Yeah. I was going to say, Jamie, boy, we sound like we really, it's heaven's on earth, but the first thing people are going to say is like, have you not noticed it's a really violent world? And, don't we need law, and don't we need law enforcement, and don't we need, weapons, and don't we need those things? And N.T. Wright doesn't really get into, the means of violent control, but he's saying yes, because we have a broken signpost, in the interim part of So, what do you say to the skeptic about Jesus's way of doing power? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, and you really can't. You look at what goes on in our world, and to say that Jesus offers us a different way, and some people say, well, that way's been tried and true, and it just hadn't worked out, it hadn't panned out. I think we have to understand, at least from a Christian perspective, we live in an already but not yet reality of God's kingdom. That God's kingdom has come on earth as it is in heaven, but it's not come in its fullness. And as Christians, we anticipate a day when that fullness will come and the reign of Christ will be made complete. And so we look forward to that fullness. But in the meantime, as Christians, we are called to live. We are called to live differently. And what I mean by that is that we are called to demonstrate to the world that there's a different way of living out your power. And we're not here to say you got to surrender your power, you got to give it up, because that wouldn't be a good way to live either. Yeah. But what we're saying is that everybody's been entrusted with power, and Genesis, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we've all
Genesis
got
1. I was going to say, we've been given a human vocation
Yes.
to be in this earth as image bearers, which we've talked about, but we can't talk about that enough. I don't think.
And what Jesus does is he allows and the message of the gospel is that we get to show the world a different way of using that power, and it's a way that's defined by self-giving love, and
Yes.
and so the end is not violence.
And so we're looking, the end is not violence, and we're looking to God to use us in a redemptive capacity. So I think that's probably a good place for us to stop, because next week I want us to get into a little bit more Bible in this, and talk a little bit about John's connection to Genesis and to the prophets, to the Psalms, and what's Jesus really here to do? Mm-hmm. Is he just here as the Lamb of God, or is it even more manifold than that? So we can pick up on that a little bit more next week.
And I'll leave us with this. I think this
Okay.
is a good scripture, but in 2 Corinthians 12, Paul says, "My grace is, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Mm-hmm. That and so I think that's a great message for us as we leave. That and so if we're struggling with maybe we're struggling with as people and we feel like we don't have power, I think the good news is that God's power can be manifested even through our weaknesses.
Maybe even more so sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Friends, thanks for joining us today for Together What If, as we've discussed the broken signpost of power. If you enjoy this content, I really encourage you to like and to share, and to please join us again next week as we pick up on this theme of power. Have a great week.
All this pain, I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come out from this ground at all? You make beautiful things, you make beautiful things out of the dust. You
king. Ain't no